There is one final layer to reunion that many couples do not anticipate because it feels almost disloyal to admit. Sometimes when distance ends, there is grief. Not grief for the person, not grief for the love, but grief for the version of the relationship that distance created. Long-distance love has a particular rhythm. It is structured around anticipation. There are countdowns, itineraries, carefully planned reunions. You mark time by "next time I see you." The relationship lives in heightened emotional space. Words matter, time is precious. Conflict is often softened by scarcity. Distance, in its own way, protects intensity. When you reunite permanently, that rhythm dissolves. There is no next flight to book, no airport scene to dramatize devotion. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. You wake up next to each other, not for a weekend, but indefinitely, and something subtle shifts. The ache of missing each other, which once confirmed the depth of feeling, fades. The urgency to say everything before Sunday night diminishes. The relationship becomes less cinematic and more continuous. For some couples, this transition feels like relief. For others, it feels like loss. And that loss can be confusing. How can I miss the distance, someone might think, when distance was so painful? Because pain and passion often coexist. Distance magnified desire. It sharpened focus. It created a sense of chosenness every time one partner boarded a plane. The sacrifices themselves became proof of love. When those sacrifices are no longer necessary, couples sometimes experience an unexpected quiet. And quiet can be misinterpreted. Instead of recognizing the shift as evolution, some interpret it as decline. We used to talk for hours. We used to feel so intense. It doesn't feel the same. Of course it doesn't feel the same. It is not the same. You have moved from episodic love to sustained partnership, from curated experiences to integrated life, from intensity fueled by absence to stability built on presence. But stability can feel less intoxicating. There is also nostalgia involved. Humans have a tendency to romanticize the past, especially periods that required effort and resilience. The long-distance chapter may come to symbolize devotion, endurance, even youth. Reunion, by contrast, introduces responsibility. Bills, routines, shared obligations. The extraordinary becomes embedded in the everyday. To grieve this shift does not mean you want to return to distance. It means you are acknowledging that something meaningful has transformed. And transformation always involves both gain and loss. If couples do not name this grief, it can surface as restlessness. One partner may unconsciously recreate distance through travel, overwork, or emotional withdrawal, not because they want separation, but because part of them misses the heightened state that separation produced. Others may chase intensity through conflict. Arguments can momentarily recreate the emotional charge that distance once provided. The nervous system, accustomed to peaks and valleys, may find equilibrium unfamiliar. This is why conscious integration is essential. Instead of longing for the intensity of distance, couples can ask, what did that phase give us that we want to preserve? Was it intentional communication, deep verbal intimacy, regular expressions of appreciation, structured date nights? Those elements can be carried forward deliberately. Intensity does not have to disappear, but it must be cultivated differently. Reunion invites couples to develop a quieter form of devotion, one not measured by miles traveled or tickets purchased, but by daily presence, by choosing kindness when you are tired, by maintaining curiosity when routine sets in, by creating rituals that honor the bond without relying on scarcity. Scarcity is a powerful amplifier, but abundance requires discipline. It requires remembering that the person in front of you is still the one you once counted days to see. It requires resisting the complacency that proximity can invite. There is maturity in accepting that love evolves, that passion may soften into warmth, that longing may transform into steadiness, that fireworks may give way to embers that burn longer if tended. And so if you find yourself missing the intensity of distance, do not panic, do not assume something is broken. Instead, recognize that you are adjusting to a new chapter. Ask yourselves, what are we grieving? And how can we honor what was without clinging to it? Because the goal was never to live in perpetual anticipation. The goal was to build a life. And life, unlike distance, is not lived in countdowns. It is lived in ordinary days, chosen again and again. There is a quiet assumption many couples carry into reunion. Once we are physically together, everything will feel easier. After all, distance was the obstacle. The longing, the time zones, the airport goodbyes, those were the hardships. So when proximity finally becomes permanent, it is expected to resolve the emotional strain automatically. But physical closeness and emotional intimacy are not the same thing. In fact, proximity can expose what distance once protected. During long-distance, communication is often deliberate. You schedule calls, you carve out uninterrupted time, you ask meaningful questions because conversation is the primary bridge. Words carry the relationship. Emotional intimacy can deepen precisely because it must be articulated. When you reunite, that structure dissolves. You no longer need to schedule connection, and so sometimes you don't. Daily life fills the space that intentional conversation once occupied. Work fatigue replaces late-night vulnerability. Shared silence replaces long explanations. And here is the paradox. Being together all the time can make it easier to stop truly seeing each other. In distance, you narrate your day. In proximity, you assume the other already knows. In distance, you ask, "How are you really?" In proximity, you say, "Did you pay the bill?" It is not that love disappears. It is that logistics compete with intimacy. There is also the matter of unresolved tension. Distance can function as a buffer. If a disagreement arises during a visit, it may be softened by the limited time together. If conflict surfaces during a call, it ends when the call ends. You return to separate spaces to regulate independently. Reunion removes that buffer. Now, when conflict emerges, it lingers in the room. There is no physical exit into separate homes. Patterns that were manageable from afar can feel magnified up close. Communication styles that seemed charming during short visits may feel overwhelming in daily life. The partner who needs space may feel suffocated. The partner who seeks reassurance may feel neglected. These dynamics existed before. Distance simply diluted their intensity. Proximity reveals compatibility at a deeper level. How do you handle stress when it is not filtered through a screen? How do you negotiate quiet when both of you are tired? How do you express irritation without escalating? These are not abstract questions. They are lived realities once distance ends. Sexual intimacy also shifts. Anticipation once fueled desire. Reunions were charged with novelty and scarcity. In everyday proximity, desire must coexist with routine. Laundry is in the corner. Emails are unanswered. Exhaustion is real. Without conscious cultivation, couples may misinterpret the natural decline of novelty as loss of chemistry. But chemistry was never meant to sustain itself on anticipation alone. Emotional intimacy in proximity requires a different skill set than emotional intimacy at a distance. It requires presence without performance, vulnerability without the dramatic framing of limited time. It requires learning how to connect in the ordinary, and the ordinary is less cinematic. This is where some couples become disillusioned. They think, "We were so strong long distance. Why does this feel harder now?" The answer is not that distance was better. It is that distance emphasized certain strengths: communication, longing, intentionality, while minimizing others: conflict resolution in shared space, domestic negotiation, daily compromise. Reunion asks you to develop the muscles that distance did not train. Instead of romanticizing the past phase, couples must integrate its strengths into the present one. The depth of conversation that defined your calls? Protect it. Schedule it, even when you live together. The intentional dates you planned during visits? Continue them. Do not assume proximity replaces effort. Physical closeness is an opportunity, not a guarantee. There is also a psychological adjustment in recalibrating expectations. During distance, you may have imagined that being together would feel like constant relief. When that relief coexists with frustration or boredom, guilt can surface. Shouldn't I be happier? But happiness is not a permanent state. It is a fluctuating response to experience. What matters more is security. Do you feel safe expressing discomfort? Do you feel heard when tensions arise? Do you feel chosen even when the moment is mundane? These questions determine intimacy more than passion does. Reunion is not about recreating the emotional intensity of long-distance love. It is about building a form of closeness that survives proximity. It is about learning how to be connected without the scaffolding of absence. So if physical closeness does not instantly resolve every emotional gap, do not panic. It is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you have entered a more complex stage of partnership. Ask yourselves, are we relying on proximity to do the work that communication must still do? Are we assuming that being in the same room equals being emotionally attuned? Because love does not deepen simply because the miles disappear. It deepens when two people choose to remain curious, even when nothing stands between them. When distance ends, geography changes overnight, but identity does not. One of the least discussed realities of reunion is the quiet rebalancing of power. During long distance, both partners often operate in parallel autonomy. Each has their own routines, careers, communities, and support systems. The relationship exists between two relatively stable worlds. Reunion disrupts that symmetry. Often, one partner relocates, one leaves a job, one steps away from family, language, familiarity. Even if the move is enthusiastic and consensual, it is still a rupture. The relocating partner enters the new phase with invisible losses: professional momentum, social networks, daily competence. They may go from being fully independent to temporarily dependent in very practical ways, needing guidance to navigate a city, relying on their partner's income, waiting on visa approvals, rebuilding community from scratch. Independence is not only logistical, it is psychological. When that independence is interrupted, even temporarily, it can unsettle identity. Meanwhile, the partner who remained in place often experiences a different shift. Their environment is unchanged, but their responsibility increases. They may feel pressure to provide stability, financially, socially, emotionally. The home becomes shared space. The familiar becomes negotiated. They might sense, consciously or not, that they hold more structural power simply because they are on home ground. Neither partner planned for imbalance, and yet imbalance appears. This is where reunion becomes more complex than the romantic narrative suggests. Love alone does not neutralize power dynamics. In fact, love can sometimes obscure them. The relocating partner may hesitate to express discomfort because they chose the move. They may feel they have no right to complain. Gratitude mixes with grief. Excitement mixes with loneliness. They might think, I should be happy. This is what we wanted. But desire for proximity does not erase the experience of loss. On the other side, the partner who stayed may underestimate the magnitude of that loss. From their perspective, the hard part, distance, is over. They may expect relief and celebration. When tension surfaces instead, confusion follows. Why are we arguing now? We finally have what we wanted. Because reunion is not only about gaining closeness, it is about redistributing autonomy. Financial dependency is one of the most sensitive aspects of this redistribution. If one partner is temporarily unable to work due to immigration processes, credential transfers, or job search, the earning partner may carry the economic weight. Even with goodwill, this shift can subtly alter dynamics. The provider may feel pressure, the dependent partner may feel diminished. Power in relationships is rarely overt. It appears in small decisions. Who knows the city better? Whose career dictates location? Whose income pays the rent? Whose social circle becomes the default community? Without awareness, these structural advantages can transform into emotional distance. Reunion also requires renegotiation of roles that were once independent. During distance, household management was separate. Now it is shared. Who cooks? Who cleans? Who manages bills? Who organizes social plans? These negotiations can trigger conflict not because of laziness or unwillingness, but because both partners are recalibrating their sense of contribution. Contribution is deeply tied to dignity. If one partner feels they are contributing less, financially, socially, professionally, insecurity can surface. They may overcompensate in other areas or withdraw entirely. If the other feels they are carrying more than expected, resentment can emerge quietly. What makes this stage particularly delicate is that both partners may be afraid to speak openly. The relocating partner fears appearing ungrateful. The hosting partner fears appearing controlling. Silence becomes the breeding ground for misunderstanding. The work here is not to eliminate imbalance, because in life, seasons of imbalance are inevitable. The work is to name it, to say, right now, this phase benefits one of us structurally more than the other. How do we protect equality emotionally while navigating inequality practically? That sentence alone can transform a relationship. Reunion demands a conscious restoration of mutual respect. The relocating partner must be encouraged to reclaim agency, to build their own routines, friendships, professional identity. The hosting partner must resist the temptation to overmanage or unconsciously assert superiority. Both must recognize that temporary dependency does not equal permanent hierarchy. And perhaps most importantly, both must grieve what was lost. Because something was lost. The independence of distance, the familiarity of old environments, the predictability of separate routines. Reunion is not only addition, it is exchange. When couples acknowledge this openly, power becomes shared again, not because circumstances are perfectly equal, but because dignity is preserved. So if reunion feels uneven, do not interpret it as incompatibility. Interpret it as transition. Ask yourselves, who feels more vulnerable right now? Who feels more responsible? And how can we rebalance not through control, but through empathy? Because love does not eliminate power dynamics. It invites us to navigate them consciously, and the strongest reunions are not built on fantasy fulfilled, but on respect restored. You do not argue about who forgot to buy groceries because you are not sharing a kitchen. You do not negotiate bathroom schedules or division of chores. You are spared the subtle irritations that accumulate in daily life. In many ways, long-distance love exists in a heightened state, emotionally intense, often deeply verbal, sometimes idealized. Reunion collapses that heightened state into ordinary reality. Suddenly, love is no longer contained within curated weekends or late-night calls. It exists at 7 a.m., before coffee. It exists in traffic, in fatigue, in silence. It exists when one partner wants to talk and the other wants space. And this shift can feel destabilizing, not because the love is gone, but because the context has changed. Fantasy thrives in absence. Reality demands integration. When you reunite, you are no longer relating to the imagined version of your partner that distance allowed you to preserve. You are relating to the full, unedited human being, their habits, their moods, their stress responses, the way they load the dishwasher, the way they process conflict in real time rather than through carefully composed messages. Distance often gives couples time to curate their responses. If a message triggers you, you can pause before replying. If a disagreement arises on a call, it ends when the call ends. Physical proximity removes those buffers. Conflict does not disappear when the screen goes dark. It lingers in the room, and so couples may find themselves thinking, quietly, why does this feel harder than I expected? It feels harder because you are no longer sustained by anticipation. You are sustained by compatibility. There is also a subtle grief embedded in reunion. The long-distance phase, however painful, had a certain intensity. The airport embrace, the countdown to the next visit, the ache of missing each other that confirmed depth of feeling. When proximity becomes permanent, longing softens. The dramatic highs level out. Stability can feel, at first, like loss. This is where many couples misinterpret normal adjustment as relational decline. They assume that because the emotional fireworks are less explosive, something is wrong. In reality, what is happening is a transition from fantasy-driven passion to reality-based intimacy. And that transition requires skill. You are not just merging schedules, you are merging nervous systems. You are learning how to coexist in shared space, how to tolerate differences in rhythm, how to negotiate privacy within proximity. In distance, individuality is structurally protected. In reunion, it must be consciously protected. Without intention, couples can swing from longing to suffocation. The partner who once complained about missing you may now feel overwhelmed by constant togetherness. This does not mean the relationship was stronger at a distance. It means it was different. Distance often emphasizes emotional expression. Couples talk deeply because conversation is the primary bridge. When you reunite, conversation competes with routine. Bills need paying. Laundry needs folding. Work stress intrudes. Without conscious effort, the depth of dialogue that once defined the relationship can quietly diminish. And so couples must ask themselves, How do we bring the intentionality of distance into proximity? How do we preserve curiosity now that access is unlimited? How do we maintain appreciation when presence is constant? The answer lies in recognizing that reunion is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new relational phase, one that demands practical skills alongside emotional devotion. You must learn each other again, not as idealized voices through a screen, but as embodied partners navigating shared life. You must renegotiate boundaries, expectations, and rituals. You must accept that friction is not failure, it is information. The collapse of fantasy is not a tragedy, it is an invitation. An invitation to build something less cinematic but more durable, less fueled by anticipation, more grounded in daily choice. So if reunion feels imperfect, do not panic. Imperfection is evidence that you have entered reality, and real love is not sustained by fantasy fulfilled. It is sustained by two people willing to choose each other, not only at the airport gate, but at the breakfast table the morning after.